So let me just read it to you and I'll comment as I go along, okay? As Fatih Abi said, this is the lukewarm church, so that you've got the context already. So, to the angel of the church of Laodikeia write these things. These things says the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. I just love the way Jesus describes himself there, because this is Jesus speaking. It's a letter that he's writing to this church, and he describes himself as the faithful and true witness. And I just love the fact that Jesus doesn't lie. There's no deception or dishonesty found in Jesus. He always tells us the truth, even though sometimes truth is hard to hear. And in fact, he doesn't just tell us the truth, he is the truth. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And so he identifies himself right up front. He says, before I tell you anything that you need to hear, just know who I am. Number one, I'm faithful. And number one, I always tell the truth because I am the truth. And he says, I'm the beginning of the creation of God. Now, those words just really ring a bell in my mind, because Fatih took us to Colossae. And if you think about the letter to Colossians, how does that letter start? It really starts in chapter 1 with Paul saying, and Jesus is the image of the invisible God. All things were created by Jesus and for Jesus. And in him all things consist. And yet Jesus says of himself, I am the beginning of the creation of God. And by the way, this letter is very different to the other 6, because this letter contains no good news. At least in the other 6 letters, with the bad news, with the correction, comes a little bit of encouragement, comes a little bit of good news. To this particular church, Jesus has got nothing good to say. They were doing nothing right. Even though in their own minds, as you'll see, they thought they were on fire. They thought they were the church. But in fact, let's see what it says here. I know your works, that you are neither cold nor hot. And Fatih told us about the water supply coming via the aqueduct. So this was an example that Jesus used that they could absolutely relate to. I wish you were either cold or hot. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew you out of my mouth. And those of you who have drunk lukewarm water before, even unexpectedly, or especially unexpectedly, you just want to get rid of it. So this morning in my devotions, I was thinking, what does it actually mean to be hot spiritually? It's one thing to read about it, but in your own mind, try and think about what hot means. And it might mean things that aren't obvious up front. For me, words like sacrifice come to mind. Words like compassion, words like generosity, words like love, graciousness. And it's not always the obvious that we think of, man, this person's on fire. But actually behind the scenes is where the fire burns. How you treat your wife and how you raise your children and how you manage your money and your attitudes towards people. Your willingness to sacrifice for the cause of the gospel. These are things that make a person hot. And I remember one famous preacher, I can't remember his name, but there was an atheist. He used to love coming to watch this guy preach. And someone once asked the atheist, but why do you come and watch this man preach? You don't even believe what he says. You're an atheist. He says, I don't believe it, but he does. He's on fire, and I've come to watch him burn. So, one thing my dad taught us growing up as young Christians and young followers of Jesus is, if you're going to follow Jesus, do it wholeheartedly, do it with every fiber of your being. It's easier to cool down a fanatic, he always said, than to warm up a corpse. You can cool someone who's a bit too radical, but to warm up someone who's stuck in religion and tradition, and that's quite a challenge. So the problem with these guys was that they weren't hot. And if you think about someone who's cold spiritually, that's someone who hasn't even started yet. So those people we understand, we respect them, we love them. They haven't yet crossed the line of faith, so to speak. But these people weren't in any one of those two categories. They weren't on fire, and they weren't non-Christians. They were caught in the middle. Sort of backsliders. They were like, not even backsliders, because you're going to see in their own minds, they thought they were the cooking church. So we're going to see living in a place of self-deception. And they say the highest form of deception is self-deception. You actually get yourself to believe something about yourself and about your spirituality that's not true, but you believe it enough. You've deceived yourself. And so let's have a look and see how this deception plays out. Because you say of yourselves, I'm rich, I've become wealthy, and have need of nothing. So that's what they thought of in their own minds. But Jesus says, here's the truth. Do you not know that in fact you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked? Talk about telling the truth. So this must have been a bombshell. As Fati said, these people are affluent, they lack for nothing, they've got all the resources in the world, they're self-sufficient. But Jesus says, in fact, in my eyes, you're exactly the opposite. Not just that. He says, he uses the word blind there, which is very important because Fati mentions something of critical importance. This city was famous for, as he said, eye salve. So they had a famous eye treatment center where people would come from far and wide to get their eyes treated. So they were very good at providing physical eyesight to people. But Jesus says, although your eyesight might be amazing physically, he said, spiritually, you're blind. There's certain things about God, about life, about faith, you're just not seeing. So you might have amazing physical eyesight, but spiritually, man, you are blind. And then he says, actually also naked. As Fati said, they were famous here for producing wool, black wool in particular. You can just imagine the garments that they produced from that black wool. They were dressed in fine clothing. But Jesus again flips the coin and says, although you might have wonderful physical clothes, in the spiritual realm, I look at you and you've actually just got nothing. You're absolutely naked. So he gives them the bad news. And then he says, now's the remedy. I'm not going to leave you there because I'm gracious, I'm kind. I'm going to give you a chance to change your ways. So here's what I recommend you do. I advise you, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined in the fire. So come and swap your false sense of security, your temporary wealth for something of eternal significance, for gold refined in the fire. You might have a lot of resources on a physical level, but I'm going to give you spiritual resources that will far outweigh those things, that you may be rich, spiritually rich, and white garments that you may be clothed. Now you think about the garment that Jesus gives us. Can you remember what it is? The Bible calls it the robe of righteousness. So either you're clothed in a robe of self-righteousness, in other words, you think you can do it, like these guys thought they were good enough, they could do it, or you can recognize I can't do it. You can take off the robe of self-performance, leave that aside, and you put on the robe of righteousness, where you recognize everything I am, everything I have, everything I ever will be, is a gift of amazing grace from God, and I'm clothed in the righteousness of Jesus. Theologians call that imputed righteousness. It's a righteousness you can't earn, you can't deserve. It's imputed, it's imparted to you by God. And today when God sees you, isn't this incredible? He sees you today through the lens of Jesus. He sees you clothed in the perfect righteousness of Jesus, just as if you'd never sinned. This is the gospel. And this is the message these guys needed to hear. And then finally he says, and anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see. In other words, I want to open your eyes with my medicine, that you will be able to see life, people, material possessions, spiritual things through a totally different set of lenses. And I think all of us here who follow Jesus can say at some point in time, it's different for different people, but our eyes were opened to see life through a totally different set of lenses. Our view of poor people, our view of people from other countries and cultures, our view of money, our view of time, our view of life itself, everything radically changed as God opened our eyes to see life through a completely different set of lenses. And I just love these words that Jesus ends off with. He says, as many as I love, I correct. So I'm not sharing these words with you because I hate you or I want the best for you. I'm actually sharing these words with you because they lead to life. You're confused in Laodicea. You think you've got everything going for yourselves, but that's not real life. I'm going to show you some correction because I truly do love you. And so guys, always keep that in the back of your minds. God, He gives you correction, He gives you advice, He gives you counsel, not because He wants the worst for you, but because in every area of life He wants the best for you, and you can start to live life by divine design, by divine blueprint. It changes everything. And then I think the most famous verse of all, which we all know and have quoted over the years, he ends off with this. And just try and imagine the scene. Verse 20, he says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Now often evangelists will use that in an evangelistic sermon. In other words, if you want to accept Christ, open the door of your heart. But the context, I guess it could be used like that, but that's not the context. These guys had locked Jesus out the church. So every day, every Sunday, they were singing their songs and praying their prayers and preaching their sermons. Unbeknown to them, Jesus wasn't even present. That's how oblivious they were. So Jesus says, actually, I'm standing at the door and knocking. If you'd like me to come, not just into your heart, but into your church, and truly make you come alive, the handle's on the inside. I'm waiting. Open the door, let me come in, and everything will change. And then he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So yes, this letter was written to the church of Laodicea 2,000 years ago, but clearly it's in the Bible today because God recognized that even 2,000 years later, in modern society, people would still be battling with the same problems that these guys battled with all those years ago. So let's be vigilant. We come from different churches and different places, but let's just keep an eye, first of all, on our own hearts and on our own church context to make sure that we are living by divine design and not living in a place of self-deception. Amen? Amen. Thank you, Fatih. Thank you so much.